Penn Station was its usual mess of humanity. Announcements crackled. Overhead, heels tapped against worn marble, and the scent of pretzels and diesel clung to the February air like fog. Amid the chaos, a solitary figure sat motionless on bench 14, just beneath the flickering departures board. His posture was rigid military. His uniform, old but immaculate, clung to his thin frame like it still remembered the man he used to be. Thomas Reed, 92 years old, wore his marine dress blues with quiet pride. The Medal of Honor on his chest caught the fluorescent lights in occasional flashes, though few passers-by noticed. Those who did usually paused only for a second, confused to see such dignity stationed among the grime and noise. He sat with both hands resting gently atop a scuffed leather briefcase, reinforced with brass clasps dulled by decades of use. Inside were documents fragile, yellowed, and powerful. They had been locked away since the final days of World War II, and only now, after 70 years, had the Pentagon authorized their release. Thomas wasn't just carrying papers, he was carrying history. He could have asked his granddaughter to drive him to Washington. She'd insisted, in fact, but Thomas had refused. Some journeys, he had told her, a man has to finish on his own. What he didn't know, what no one had warned him about, was that his briefcase had triggered a flag on the X-ray scanners. To the transit police, it looked suspicious, heavy, reinforced, unopened. In an era of constant alerts and overreactions, that was all it took. "Sir, I need you to open the case," came the voice. Thomas looked up to find 3 officers in black tactical gear standing over him. One of them, a young man with nervous eyes and a hand on his taser, repeated the order more forcefully. "I'm afraid I can't do that, son," Thomas said evenly, his voice low but firm. "These documents are under federal protection. I have orders." He reached slowly into his coat and produced a letter on official Pentagon letterhead. The officer barely glanced at it. "I said open the case now." The crowd began to slow. Commuters pulled out phones. Something felt wrong. Tension coiled around the bench like a live wire. "I've carried this case since before you were born," Thomas murmured. "I didn't survive Omaha Beach to be treated like this." But it didn't matter. Seconds later, the officer pulled the trigger. The taser wires flew. Thomas Reed's body convulsed, and the world around him changed forever. The crack of the taser firing had turned heads, but the sight of a 92-year-old Medal of Honor recipient collapsing to the dirty tiles of Penn Station was what made people start recording. Screams erupted. Someone shouted, "He's a veteran, for God's sake," while another ran to his side. Transit police hesitated, unsure of whether to assist or control the crowd. The officer who had pulled the trigger, Martinez, stood froze. 2 strangers knelt beside Thomas. One was a woman in a gray business suit, her high heels discarded as she pressed trembling fingers to his neck. "He's not breathing," she said, her voice barely holding together. The other was an older man, Vietnam-era ballcap army tattoo fading on his forearm, who took one look at Thomas's uniform and began shouting for a medic with the command of someone who'd seen war. Within minutes, hashash, veteran tased, and hashash Penn Station. Hero were trending across every major platform. The footage was jarring, Thomas's peaceful posture on the bench, the tense escalation, the refusal to listen, and then without warning, the firing of the taser. Millions watched it unfold in real time, voices rising together in collective outrage. In a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, General Patricia Hayes was reviewing satellite updates from overseas when her aide rushed in without knocking. "Ma'am, you need to see this." She frowned, but turned toward the screen as the aide pulled up a video. As the frames played, Thomas refusing to release the briefcase, the Medal of Honor glinting on his chest, the electric snap of the taser, her expression darkened. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Pause. Zoom in. The image sharpened. General Hayes inhaled sharply. "That's Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reed." "You know him?" the aide asked. "I trained under him," she said quietly, "back when I was a junior intel officer. That man taught me everything I know about code protection and mission integrity. He's a legend." She rose instantly, all steel and fire. "Get me the Director of Homeland Security. Get our New York liaison on the line. I want federal boots on the ground in 5 minutes. We are locking that station down." Back at Penn Station, the atmosphere had shifted from confusion to fury. More veterans had arrived, some drawn by the chaos, others by the footage already flashing across social media. A Marine in dress green stepped forward and stood silently beside Thomas's crumpled form. An Army reservist in fatigues joined him. then a retired Navy man. Without a word, they formed a protective ring around the unconscious hero. "You want him," the Vietnam vet growled at the officers. "You'll have to go through all of us." The officers hesitated. Backup was coming, but so were more cameras. A pair of local news reporters squeezed into the crowd, followed by CNN and NBC crews setting up just outside the station's east entrance. Overhead, news choppers hovered like vultures, circling a battlefield. Martinez stepped back, his face, pale hand shaking. "I followed protocol," he muttered, but no one was listening. Not anymore. The first black SUV screeched to a stop outside the station, then another, then 6 more. Men and women in dark suits and tactical vests poured out their earpieces, glinting. They moved fast enough that no one had time to ask who they were before they'd established a perimeter, cleared a path to Thomas, and secured the area with military efficiency. Agent Sarah Chin, a 20-year veteran of the Secret Service, led the team. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she approached the transit officers, who authorized the use of force she demanded. Martinez stepped forward automatically. The subject was non-compliant. He refused to surrender a suspicious briefcase. That subject, Chin, cut in coldly, is a Medal of Honor recipient on a classified transport mission under direct Pentagon authorization. You just tasered a federal asset in the middle of an active operation. Do you have any idea the firestorm you've just unleashed? She didn't wait for a reply. Chin knelt beside Thomas as paramedics arrived with a stretcher. His pulse was weak, but still there. His eyelids flickered. She leaned in close, her voice low and steady. "Sergeant Reed, can you hear me? The documents are secure. You held the line. We've got you now." One of the agents gathered the scattered documents, slipping them carefully into a secure folder, as another swept the perimeter, confiscating phones from anyone who had gotten too close. But the damage was already done. The video was everywhere. In D.C., the White House issued a preliminary statement condemning the apparent use of excessive force. By the hour's end, the president had been briefed. Members of Congress from both parties issued calls for accountability. Protest vigils sparked up at train stations in Boston, Chicago, and L.A. And at the center of it all was the image that had seared itself into the heart of the nation, a frail, decorated veteran lying motionless on a train station floor, surrounded not by enemies on foreign soil, but by the very people sworn to protect him. America had seen enough, and it would not look away this time. The ambulance tore through the streets of Manhattan, sirens wailing as slush sprayed from the tires. Inside, paramedics worked feverishly over Thomas Reed's fragile body. The taser's electrical current had done more than knock him unconscious. It had triggered a cardiac event, and his heart rhythm danced dangerously between life and silence. Agent Sarah Chin sat at the rear of the vehicle, one hand gripping the metal railing, the other clenched tight on her lap. "Hold on, Sergeant," she whispered under her breath. "You're not dying in the back of an ambulance. Not after everything you've survived." At Walter Reed Medical Center, emergency teams were already waiting. They rushed Thomas through sliding doors and into trauma bay, 3 shouting codes and vital signs as a nurse shouted for cardiac paddles. Chin didn't follow into the room, her duty now turned from protection to accountability. Back at Penn Station, the federal agents moved quickly. Agent Chin's order had been clear: detain all transit officers involved in the incident until internal affairs and federal investigators arrived. Martinez, still dazed and pale, was the first to be cuffed. "You're under arrest," one agent informed him flatly, "for assault on a federal operative, obstruction of a classified military mission, and violation of the Civil Rights Act. You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane," Martinez interrupted. He looked like a threat." "That man was a war hero," the agent said, "and today he was operating under direct Pentagon orders. You didn't just use excessive force, you compromised national security." Rodriguez and the 3rd officer who had stood by during the tasering were also placed under investigative custody. None resisted. The weight of the moment pressed down like lead. Cameras captured their detainment as federal agents cleared the area, confiscating weapons radios and surveillance footage from. Within hours, news of Thomas's condition and Martinez's arrest was breaking across every major outlet. CNN cut into regular programming. Fox News ran the footage on a loop. Headlines blared: 92-year-old war hero tased by transit police Pentagon. Confirms classified mission and federal agents arrest officer in veteran assault case. At the hospital, hours passed in tense silence. Then just before dawn, the chief surgeon stepped into the waiting area where Agent Chin sat reviewing her notes. His expression was tired, but his voice was steady. "He's stable, weak, but alive. The taser caused a cardiac arrhythmia, but we were able to correct it. He'll need observation and rest." Relief broke across Chin's face. She exhaled finally, unclenching her fists. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you." Later that morning, General Patricia Hayes arrived in person. Her appearance caused a stir among hospital staff and patients alike, but she ignored the whispers and camera phones. Chin met her at the elevator. "Status," Hayes asked. "Alive. Just barely. The documents have been secured. All video footage has been pulled and stored under federal archive protection. Martinez is in custody, and the others are under investigation." Hayes nodded grimly. "Good. But this is just the beginning. I've already spoken to the president. The DOJ is launching a civil rights case, and the Pentagon will be reviewing every policy around veteran engagement and classified transport protocol." She stepped into Thomas's room quietly. He lay in bed, pale eyes closed, the steady beep of monitors filling the room. The Medal of Honor had been cleaned and placed on the table beside him. His hands that had carried secrets through decades of war and peace, now lay still atop the same briefcase that nearly cost him his life. Hayes pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "You made it," she said softly. "You did your duty. Again." By afternoon, public protests had begun outside transit headquarters and Penn Station itself. Veterans arrived with signs, families lit candles, volunteers handed out flags. Across the country, train stations reported similar gatherings, impromptu vigils for a man most had never met, but all seemed to recognize as a symbol of something far greater. Social media exploded with tributes. Fellow Marines shared old photos of Thomas in his prime. Historians posted declassified details of his wartime service. Civilians moved by his dignity flooded platforms with hashtags #Justice for Thomas, #Respect Our Vets, and #Never Again. Legal teams moved fast. The Department of Justice formally charged Officer Martinez within 24 hours of the incident. The charges were serious assault on a federal agent, willful interference in a classified mission, civil rights violations under Title 18, and criminal negligence. His defense team scrambled to manage the fallout, arguing he couldn't have known who Thomas was. But video evidence, public sentiment, and the testimony of Agent Chin told a different story. It didn't matter what he knew. It mattered that he didn't listen. And now the nation was watching. The hospital room was still when Thomas Reed finally opened his eyes. He blinked against the fluorescent light overhead, disoriented but alive. Machines hummed quietly around him, and a soft breeze from the cracked window stirred the edges of the Pentagon letter resting on the nightstand beside his bed. Agent Chin, seated silently in the corner, stood as he stirred. "You're safe, Sergeant," she said gently. "You held the line. You finished the mission." Thomas gave a faint nod, eyes flicking toward the briefcase now secured beneath a clear, protective shell. The documents he rasped. "Delivered to the National Archives. Every page intact," she assured him. "You did it." In the days that followed, the nation's attention never wavered. The footage of the tasering had burned itself into the public conscience. News networks dissected every frame while millions shared tributes online. Even as Thomas recovered, his story had taken on a life of its own, a symbol of how easily a nation could forget the men who built it and how fiercely it could be reminded. It didn't take long before Congress issued a formal summons. A special hearing was scheduled before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. It was clear this wouldn't be a routine inquiry, it was a reckoning. Doctors warned Thomas against the strain, but he insisted. "I didn't survive 2 wars to be silent when it matters most," he said. "They asked for my voice. I intend to use it." When he arrived at the Capitol, the building stood hushed. Reporters lined the steps, veterans saluted from barricades, and staff paused in corridors as he passed by, wheeled gently by Agent Chin. He wore his Marine dress blues, freshly pressed, and on his chest, the Medal of Honor shone beneath the lights. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity. C-SPAN carried the broadcast live. A gallery of civilians, veterans, and lawmakers watched in silence as Thomas was wheeled to the witness table. He declined help with the microphone. His voice, though weathered, was steady. "My name is Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reed," he began. "United States Marine Corps, retired, service number 01984371. He paused, looking up at the members of Congress before him. "I've carried secrets for this country longer than many of you have been alive. I've seen what freedom costs. I've watched good men fall and never rise again. And I've made peace with those sacrifices. But I never imagined I'd be brought to the brink of death, not by enemies overseas, but by the hands of those sworn to protect our own soil. He detailed every moment of the incident, from the bench at Penn Station to the officer's hand on the taser, to the crushing silence as the electricity surged through his chest. His voice did not rise. He didn't need drama. Truth was powerful enough. I wasn't a threat, he said. I was a servant of this nation. Still am. I followed protocol. I showed identification. I asked for reason. What I received was fear, ignorance, and a total breakdown in respect. Several committee members wiped their eyes. Others nodded solemnly. I'm not here for vengeance, he continued. I'm here because I want the next veteran, the next old man on a mission to be treated with dignity, not suspicion. To be heard, not silenced. If my story means anything, let it mean that we can still learn. When he finished, the room rose in unison. Every person, senator, staffer, reporter stood in silent respect. It wasn't applause. It was something deeper. In the weeks that followed, legislative momentum surged. Bipartisan support poured in for sweeping reforms. The proposed bill was titled simply and unanimously the Thomas Reed Act. The act mandated mandatory veteran-sensitive security protocols at all federal and transportation facilities. It required specialized training for officers on de-escalation with elderly and vulnerable populations. Most crucially, it provided legal protections for those on federal missions involving sensitive or classified material, ensuring coordination between federal agencies and local security to prevent future tragedies. The bill passed both the House and Senate with overwhelming majorities. The president signed it into law at a nationally televised ceremony with Thomas seated beside him, hand resting lightly on the same briefcase that had sparked it all. Agent Chin stood behind him that day, proud but silent. In the aftermath, policy shifted quickly. Airports, train stations, and federal buildings instituted new training. Officers were re-educated. Coordination between the Pentagon and transportation authorities became routine. The term Reed Protocol became shorthand in law enforcement briefings across the country. But for Thomas, the real victory wasn't in legislation. It was in the letters. Every day, hundreds arrived at his hospital room and later his home. Letters from young soldiers, from elderly veterans, from families, from children who had learned his name in school. You reminded us, one letter read, you reminded us what courage really looks like. As he sat on his porch weeks later, sunsetting over the horizon, Thomas Reed held that letter in his hand, smiling faintly. Maybe, just maybe, the battle had been worth it. The reforms took hold faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months of the Thomas Reed Act's passing, every federal transportation hub had implemented veteran-sensitive protocols. Officers received mandatory de-escalation training, and coordination with military agencies became routine. Across airports, train stations, and public facilities, a quiet transformation began, born not of pressure, but of respect. Thomas Reed lived to see it all. He watched from his modest home in Virginia as headlines shifted from tragedy to progress. He visited Penn Station one final time, escorted by a new generation of officers, trained under the very law his courage inspired. There, at the northeast wing of the terminal, a memorial garden had been built, granite benches, etched with the names of veterans who faced injustice, and a single bronze plaque bearing his name. It read, Thomas Reed, Defender of Dignity, Guardian of Memory. The briefcase that once held America's secrets now sat safely at the Smithsonian next to his medals uniform and a screen playing footage of his testimony. School children came in groups. Veterans came alone. Some left in silence, others in tears. 2 years after the day he was tased, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 94, his hand resting on a folded American flag. News of his death made national headlines. Thousands attended his funeral, including General Patricia Hayes, Agent Chin lawmakers, and veterans from every branch. It wasn't just a farewell, it was a tribute. Out of his story grew the Thomas Reed Veterans Protection Center, a Liga Tased. His final mission had not only preserved history, it changed it. And in the quiet legacy he left behind, America found something it desperately needed: a reminder that true service does not end with war, and that justice for our heroes is not optional, it is sacred. Life's greatest battles are not always fought on distant shores. Sometimes they unfold in silence, in places we overlook, through acts of quiet courage that demand everything from the few, so the many may never be forgotten. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and share how Thomas Reed's legacy speaks to you. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that honor those who stood for dignity when it mattered most. Let's make sure the world never forgets what respect truly means.